I've seen too many people get burned on cheap sewing machines that promise industrial-grade power, but can't even pull a leather strap without stalling. The regret shows up when a project sits half-finished because the foot keeps slipping or the motor quits mid-stitch. That hesitation is real, especially when you're looking at upholstery, auto interiors, or marine canvas where the material is thick, unforgiving, and the margin for error is razor-thin. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Consew 206RB5 isn't marketed as a budget option. It's positioned as the workhorse that professionals turn to when they need a machine that can actually handle the grunt work. That makes it a very different beast from the home sewing models that sit on a tabletop and manage a few dozen stitches per minute. The first thing I asked myself was whether the extra heft and the servo motor justify the price for a serious hobbyist or a small shop owner. The answer boiled down to three practical questions. Do you need a walking foot that feeds fabric, leather, or canvas evenly? Do you regularly stitch seams longer than a few centimeters? And can you accommodate a floor-standing unit with its own table in your workspace? If you spend any time on furniture refurbishment, custom car seats, or marine upholstery, the walking foot alone changes the game. Traditional feed dogs push the top layer while the needle drags the lower layers, which can cause the fabric to stretch or shift under heavy material. Consew's triple feed system synchronizes the foot, the feed dogs, and the presser, essentially pulling the whole stack forward as a unit. In a real-world scenario, imagine you're stitching a 12mm leather strap for a vintage motorcycle seat. On a standard machine, the leather would bunch, the needle would snag, and you'd end up with an uneven seam that weakens under load. On the 206RB5, the strap feeds smoothly, the needle penetrates cleanly, and you get a uniform stitch that can take the stress of daily riding. The extra-long stitch length up to 10 mm also matters when you're dealing with heavy canvas or thick upholstery foam. A longer stitch distributes tension more evenly across the seam, reducing the chance of the material tearing at the stitch line. I tested this by sewing a 14mm layer of marine canvas over a foam backing for a boat cover. The machine held the fabric taut without pulling, and the long stitches gave the seam enough flexibility to move with the boat's hull without cracking. For anyone who's ever tried to reinforce a boat cover with short stitches, you know how quickly the seams can start to split in the solitaire environment. The servo motor is another point that separates this model from older, belt-driven industrial machines. It ramps up power only when it's needed, which means the machine stays cooler during long sessions and draws less electricity overall. In practice, that translates to fewer pauses for the motor to cool down, especially when you're stitching a continuous seam that runs several meters, say, a leather belt for a high-end sofa. I ran a test stitching a 3-meter leather strap in one go. The machine never hiccuped, and the motor stayed quiet enough that it didn't dominate the workshop noise floor. If you're setting up a small shop where you might be working late, that lower noise level can actually make the difference between a productive night and a frustrating one. Now, no machine is perfect, and the Consew 206RB5 has a few trade-offs that matter once it's in your shop. First, the size. The unit comes with a sturdy metal table that's meant to stay in a fixed spot. If you have a cramped studio or you need to move the machine between rooms, you'll find the footprint a bit cumbersome. The table itself is heavy, and while you can disassemble it, it's not a quick swap setup. So, if you're a mobile crafter who works out of a garage or a shared space, you might want to think twice or budget for a dedicated area. Second, the learning curve. The walking foot and servo motor are intuitive once you get the hang of them, but the machine's controls are not as plug-and-play as a consumer model. You'll spend a few hours adjusting stitch length, foot pressure, and the timing of the servo to match different materials. That's not a flaw per se, it's the price of precision, but it does mean you need to be comfortable with a little trial and error. If you're someone who wants to drop a needle into a piece of fabric and have perfect results immediately, this machine will ask you to calibrate a bit more. Another practical point is maintenance. Because it's an industrial-grade unit, the internal parts are built to last, but they also expect regular oiling and occasional belt checks, even though the servo motor reduces belt wear compared to older models. If you're planning to run it a few hours a week, a quick oiling schedule will keep it humming. If you neglect that routine, the foot can start to lose its smooth motion, which defeats the purpose of